All right. Now we move to our panel discussion, where we have received questions from those of you who signed up and other members of the public who logged in and suggested questions for our panel. We have a really impressive panel here today. Again, I'm Josh. I'm joined by DuWayne from the State Police, and we will pose public questions to our panel. We have Sheriff Fuller, who we've met, and Chief Boysend, who we've met, and Dale Hinz from the State Police. He's the acting post commander at our Paw post, which covers Kalamazoo. We have Phil Mayer from the Michigan ACLU Michigan. And then finally, last but not least, Femia from Electronic Frontiers Foundation. So thanks to our panel for coming. And we'll start off with just kind of a fairly obvious and easy question to get us rolling. If the panel could talk about, and Chief Boysend has already done a great job starting to answer this question, what are some of the advantages of law enforcement's use of technology as the landscape changes?
All right, I'll take that first one. Some of the advantages that weren't touched on yet, that you'll hear more of, is we have the ability to find lost persons. You know, when we talk about this, technology people are concerned for how many times they're on camera a day, where are these cameras at, how is that technology used. We're going to answer a lot of those things, but one of the things that it's used for that's not talked about enough is the fact that when someone, maybe with Alzheimer's or some condition that doesn't really keep them in their faculties, leaves the home unexpected, they can be found again with these flock cameras when we're looking for license plates. That license plate of the vehicle that would be gone from that residence will be put into the system. License plate readers are out there, as well as in our flock system, which are the cameras, and we will be able to help locate that person quicker. Those cases are getting more attention because they happen all the time. And it's a great thing when we're able to unify family members of a missing person, because that's a very scary time for everyone. So that's just one of them. The other thing that's a benefit for us is we have found, and we've instituted cameras in the jail. So the deputies inside the jail, we're the second jail in the state of Michigan to put cameras on your deputies working in the jail.
Hi, good morning everyone, and thank you for joining us today. We really appreciate you taking the time out of your busy schedules to be a part of this discussion. One of the other things that hasn't been discussed yet about how technology is a benefit, and really if you're here listening to this conversation, you're probably wondering, how do we achieve that balance, and how do we make sure that that doesn't infringe upon our civil rights in the state of Michigan and beyond? One of the things that technology has allowed us to do is to pinpoint the perpetrators, like you saw in a lot of Chief Boysend's presentation there. We're able to find those perpetrators and deal with them directly instead of just flooding an area with police and stopping a lot of random vehicles because a crime has just occurred in that area. It's allowed us to be a lot more precise in our enforcement practices instead of infringing upon the rights or inconveniencing people at a minimum. It allows us to focus on those people who are committing those crimes. And when I was thinking about Chief Boysend's crime stats that he gave there at the end, I think it's important to realize that when you take those violent offenders out of the community, you can expect those shootings, homicides, and shots fired calls to go down because you're taking those individuals who are responsible for those crimes, you're surgically removing them from the community instead of dealing with a lot of smaller crimes, ancillary crimes. You're dealing with the most violent offenders and removing them from the community, which makes us so much more effective in what we're trying to accomplish, which is protecting the vulnerable from harm.
I want to throw in here also, concerns? Where does the use of technology by law enforcement start to at least intersect with other priorities for our citizenry?
Hi, Phil Mayer, ACLU of Michigan. I do want to speak to potential advantage. The notion of technology and surveillance in law enforcement. We're talking about such a range of technologies and such a range of how they're used. As a civil rights attorney who sees these things when they go wrong, I do approach much of it from a place of suspicion. There also is promise that we have to acknowledge. And I think some of the questions we should ask ourselves when we're looking at any particular surveillance technology is, are we, whatever technology we are deploying, are we deploying it in a way that is going to reduce or help eliminate the racial disparities that affect almost every phase of our criminal legal system? Are we targeting certain communities either consciously or more likely subconsciously in how technology is used and deployed? And then there's the next question is, how is information? And I say that as an advantage because if we are being conscious of that and careful about that, there may be ways that the use of technology, when very carefully considered, can help address some of these things by taking away some of the unfettered discretion that leads to some of the racial disparities in our system. Then sort of the next question is, how is this information being deployed or shared? I appreciate Chief your comments earlier about sharing with the public when the technology is used. And I, by the way, I live and work in Detroit, and so I should say, in general, my comments here, I'm not very situated in Kalamazoo specifically, so please take my comments at a sort of global or at least Michigan-wide level. And my experience is it's very common that we hear about the use of surveillance technology when it did help solve a crime, but that it's very rare that we hear about it when it didn't, or worse, when it resulted in a civil rights violation that is usually kept quiet, or if brought to court, is resisted quite fiercely. I litigate in this space. Some of you may have seen the story of Robert Williams, man who was wrongfully arrested in Detroit because of a facial recognition search gone wrong. That was my case. I brought and litigated that case. First of all, that happened, and there was no apology made to my client. There was no disclosure to the public of, hey, we've got this technology and we used it, and let's have a public conversation about how it went wrong. In order to have that conversation, we had to go to the New York Times and get this published in the New York Times, because this wasn't a conversation where law enforcement wanted to talk about the use of technology when it had gone wrong so that we could avoid that going forward. So I roundabout way, clearly I'm raising disadvantages, but raises an advantage. If this technology is to be used to our advantage, we need to be having a really open conversation about how it doesn't work and when it doesn't work. And that needs to be public. That needs to not just sort of be quietly buried, but really openly discussed and addressed. And then, if somebody has been wronged, it really shouldn't take 3 years of litigation to get some compensation and changes in policies, only after the same thing keeps happening time and time again, which again is the experience we had in that case, and unfortunately is a common one. And that leads to another thing, which is that if technology is to be used to our advantage, it really needs to be guided by and informed by the public, and preferably in a robust conversation where, unfortunately, so often we see surveillance technology deployed because somebody comes to a county commission or a city council and says, hey, we've got a new technology that is going to help us solve some crimes, and frankly, in most cases, it probably will help solve some crimes. But it's sort of presented as a binary, like, we have this new thing, shall we expend our resources on this new thing? But I invite everybody to just sort of pause for a second and picture in your mind what safety looks like. Picture yourself in a place where you're safe. Is that place surrounded by cameras? Does that place have microphones that can hear what is happening to you
in case what happened to you is violent. I think all of us, probably including my friends here, would say no, that I don't think that's the world most of us want. I understand that you're operating in an imperfect world that is not that world, but I would like to see the conversations when we think about the resources that go into this technology not be framed about will using facial recognition solve a few additional crimes, but what could these resources instead be deployed to do that could also make our community differently safe? Are there technologies that aren't really about surveillance or about solving crime that may be better long-term investments in having a safe and healthy community, in public housing, in ways that technology can facilitate public housing, by the way, it super can. So I want us to sort of broaden our scope because there are so many things that technology can do to help make us safer that aren't necessarily just about surveillance and solving crimes. That's
Yeah, Electronic Frontier Foundation, I'll call it EFF from here on out, that's what we call it. And yeah, I just kind of want to kind of build off a lot of what Phil was saying. I think EFF especially, we're a very pro-technology organization. We don't usually believe in, blanket bans on things, with some exceptions. So what we actually are looking at here is, when you get this new technology, this new shiny object, are you just implementing it to the full extent, or are you stepping back and asking, are there limitations I should put on this? There's a difference between using technology in a targeted way to solve a particular crime and mass dragnet surveillance, where everywhere you go in the community, you're being recorded and monitored and surveilled. And I think it's actually, this event is really, exciting, and I don't think that we often sit side by side and have these conversations. And instead it comes from a place of more hostility than collaboration on how to look at the technology and figure out what are the ways that it is most useful, and then what are the ways that it can, have disparate impact on marginalized communities. What are the ways that it can create a situation where everyone's being monitored and the effectiveness of the technology is actually, not that strong. And looking at ways to be more precise in our implementation of new technology.
Just to give law enforcement a leadership opportunity to respond to the question that you're raising. That question is, with all these advancements in technology, often outpacing changes in policies and laws, what oversight is there to ensure that this technology or the technologies you're using is not showing bias or infringing on people's rights? And then what oversight that has been integrated, and then what oversight are other jurisdictions around the nation implementing that you may want to bring over to the council?
I'll talk briefly on this one. So we just because, and I appreciate you being here as well, because this is great for us to hear too. So, because we're always concerned about making sure we don't bring something into our community that is not going to be accepted, or that could infringe on people's privacy, or disproportionately affect a certain segment of our community. One of the things I think is, so in other words, if there's new technology that's shiny, we don't just say, hey, we're going to implement it because it sounds cool, because we really have to work with our community to have those conversations. Is this something we want? So I think one of the things out there's shot spotter technology, right? We don't use that in Kalamazoo. And I don't think that's effective technology, because what that has is, it has basically listening devices posted throughout the community that hear for shots, that open up if there's shots fired, but it can also hear private conversations, okay? And that's, I think, an infringement, and that's going to disproportionately impact our communities where we're having shootings. And it's, it's not going to be effective. So we don't look at that technology because I don't think our community would support it, and I don't think it's effective. Whereas the other ones, license plate readers, we know are effective because almost all of our crimes have a vehicle involved, right? So if you commit a crime, then you're going to probably be going to the scene or leaving in a vehicle. And many times when you commit crimes, you commit them in neighborhoods where you don't live, right? So you drive your vehicle to a neighborhood, commit a crime, and leave. In the past, we would think, well, we got a lot of shootings in this neighborhood. We might flood that neighborhood with officers to try to prevent shootings. Well, now, as Lieutenant Hinz said very rightly, is we're more specific now. We can, instead of flooding a neighborhood with officers and stopping innocent young people that are just hanging out, we can be more specific on going after the actual shooters. And I think that's getting less and less people caught up in that criminal justice web. So, and then once we agree with the community, we have, I have quarterly conversations with our community. We talk about this technology. We had a meeting just this week with citizens that are asking for certain technologies in the neighborhood. We're not going to do it unless we are asked to do it. And so we had this one case recently with a lot of nuisance parties. Our community said we want additional resources to our neighborhood to help us with this. And when we're doing it in partnership with the community, it's a lot different than imposing something on the community. And then lastly, whenever we implement new technology, we have to have policies. I know all these agencies do as well. We have to have policies that are signed off on by your legal counsel to make sure we're not impacting someone's constitutionally protected areas with the technology, and to make sure that our professional standards can monitor the use of this technology to make sure that it's not being used inappropriately. And most technology, including license plate readers, all that stuff has, our camera systems have a robust auditing process where we can see who's accessing the system and for what reason. You just can't use it randomly, you have to have a reason. And that's all audited and tracked, and all these agencies do the same thing. So.
The other thing is too, you're talking, or three of us up here are accredited police agencies, meaning that we have actively sought someone outside of our organizations to say, yes, this is an accredited organization that follows strict guidelines that are available to the public to look at, and that, here's how they meet these guidelines. We also all put out the written directives or policies our agencies use these technologies for, and we want to make sure that our teams are fully trained on this. And like the chief said, we can track every time, anytime somebody accesses the data, and if we find that for some reason it's not being used appropriately, then the people involved would have to suffer a consequence, which could even be a firing if they were found to be using technology that is not in the scope of the agency's original meaning of it.
Add a few points on a few things. One is, I just really appreciate, Chief, your comments about ShotSpotter and your approach to it. And there's a lot of reasons I have a lot of problems with ShotSpotter, but at a fundamental thing you said, and you're right, that it doesn't work. And this is, I really appreciate law enforcement being responsive to data on this. I mean, talking about ShotSpotter not working, this isn't like me up here being my the ACLU lawyer guy. This is like the city of Chicago implemented ShotSpotter, and their own inspector general investigated its use and determined through some combination of false alerts because of backfires, or the incident was gone by the time the officers got there. What they found was casings maybe. But essentially, well over 90% of the responses weren't effective. They weren't yielding anything. And that worse, because you were, understandably, if the police are responding to a ShotSpotter alert saying shots fired, shots in progress, y'all are rolling in, understandably, as you should be responding to a shot alert on high alert. And then because that wasn't working, it was actually creating hostile encounters with the very community that ShotSpotter was attempting to protect. And so this is not to pile on to you three, because you've acknowledged, I just want to appreciate and reflect that responding to the data, sometimes it's hard, these things are hard to study, but this one, it's actually pretty easy to study. And I'm pretty amazed at how it continues to spread despite multiple studies that aren't just done by people like me, but that are done by more sort of traditionally viewed as neutral adjudicators. So I appreciate that. One thing when you talk about rules and restraints, I think is so important. And another thing I appreciated about the chief's presentation, as he talked about the way tech was used in some of your investigations, was the traditional police work that was also done in combination with the tech. And I think this is something we say, and that is said every time the technology is used, is you need to use this as a lead, you need to use this as a point of evidence. Unfortunately, everybody in this room, if you have ever turned the wrong way when Google Maps told you to, and you knew Google Maps was wrong, but you did it anyways, understands the temptation to follow the tech. And so, the police are like the rest of us, and that there's a temptation to follow the And so we need to not just say it's an investigative lead, we need to have hard, clear policies in place that require not just like the investigator to do more work, but human oversight over what that additional work has been done before you can move to things like warrants based just on tech. I mean, at the risk of banging on the drum because facial recognition is a little bit of my wheelhouse, we settled this case about facial recognition in Detroit, and we made a number of huge improvements there. But the single most important thing, the thing that was driving all of the wrongful arrests in Detroit and most of the wrongful arrests we've seen elsewhere in the country, is police getting an investigative lead from facial recognition. So essentially, they do a search and then they get back an image that says, that it might be this person. It's an investigative lead. It says in big letters, do not use this as the entirety of your investigation. And then the next step they would do is they would put that photo in a photo lineup, and show it to a witness. Or in my client's case, not even a witness, so that's a whole other point. Well, look what you just did there. You got a computer to find somebody who looks like the perpetrator, and you put it in a lineup with 5 pictures of people who look less like the perpetrator, without any further investigation. And so in our settlement in Detroit, we broke that link. We said there is a firm policy. You cannot go to a lineup from a facial recognition investigative lead without further human-centered investigation. You need to go do something else, and it needs to be signed off on by 2 layers of supervisors, because we're trying to cut this temptation to just follow your nose on the tech that leads you to believe this person could be the person before you essentially use the way that facial recognition could rig a lineup to go to a lineup that can not intended to rig anything, but that is in essence a rigged lineup that actually makes it's just confirmation bias. So I think those policies, when we talk about it, needs to not just be saying, we're going to do more investigation, but we need to think for each tech, what are the circuit breakers we need, so that there is humans enough in the loop that we're not turning the wrong way because Google Maps told us to.
Really analyzing where we can put in guardrails and limitations on technology, even with ones that have been affected, like license plate readers. They can be effective in solving crimes, but you have to balance that against, and I have to admit, I'm based in California, so I am new to Michigan, and I don't know exactly how many cameras you have, where you have them. But there are cities in California that, like Atherton, California, you cannot leave or exit that city without being captured on a license plate reader. So it is just indiscriminately mass taking, location information, photos of everyone that passes through. So in using those technologies, you need to still try and limit yourself from exploding usage of it too much, and then also look at various ways to protect this, highly sensitive data that is getting captured by them. Whether that's, limits on data retention. I think really limits on data sharing, especially across state lines. Audit policies, like you mentioned, there's even when a technology is effective, we still need to be thinking, how often is it effective compared to how much data is it collecting? And what can we do to, balance that?
How data is protected. Obviously, an enormous amount of data is being collected, and if the people who move through California are logged somewhere in a computer, that's less concerning than someone being able to access all that information. As I understand, that information got out, it could be troubling for people who have an abusive ex-partner or something like that. So what policies are in place to protect the data, and to Phil's point, are there kind of checks and balances you use for things like lineups or what have you?
All of our policies and procedures are available online on the Michigan State Police Transparency and Accountability page. When we talk about regulating each individual technology, there is a set of policies and procedures that goes along with that before we implement the use of that technology to ensure that we're not abusing that technology. To the point of that question, I think that the other concern is once you have this information collected on individuals, how are we ensuring that it's protected from hackers and other nefarious organizations that would seek to exploit that information? And I'm not gonna get into the standards that we have, but they are the highest standards to ensure that that information is protected. It's not something that we take lightly with the Michigan State Police. We want to make sure that that information is protected from outside nefarious actors. The other thing is internal actors. You got to make sure that your people aren't using it for personal gain or investigating other people that are in their lives or passing through their lives at a particular time. And so we do have regular audits of all of the information that we collect. All of our reporting systems in the state, we can see who has accessed that. All of our videos, we can see who's accessed it and when. And so if there's ever any question of somebody using it nefariously or for reasons outside of their scope of authority, we can draw it right back to those individuals knowing who and exactly when and what computer it was accessed from. So we do have those safeguards in place, and with any technology, a responsible agency would want to make sure that they have those in place before they're accessing or utilizing this technology.
It's a state program that we get audited yearly. We all have to test, take a CJIS test every year, and that's why if you walk into a police department, there's always areas that are open to the public and those that aren't. So if you go in some secure areas, you have to be escorted because we don't want people to get access. Maybe someone's got a computer screen up with personal information. We don't want the public to see that. And we get audited to make sure that we're compliant with that. And just yet another really good point on the cost of technology. I'm just telling you from a police administrator, this stuff is expensive, okay? And to your point, what Chicago invested in ShotSpotter has gotten incredible. I mean, it's a very expensive system. And what could they have used that money for that could have been more effective? And that's what we're looking at too, is this stuff keeps going up and up in cost. And at some point, you just can't keep implementing technology because it's too expensive. So we got to be real specific on what works and what's effective, and certainly not spend our money and the hard-earned taxpayer money on stuff that does not work. And not only does it work, but it can make things worse.
The audits that these guys are talking about, every police agency in the state of Michigan has to do these same audits. And when it comes to technology and how long information is stored, there is a guideline for most of the information. I'd like to say all, but I can't guarantee that, so that's why I won't say all. But accredited police agencies do have guidelines that say how long that information is collected. And that's why I'll kind of harp on the accreditation process. It's another expensive piece of the operations, but to the administrators that go through that process, and again, accredited agencies up here, it is worth the expense to spend on the accreditations to make sure that everybody inside the agency is following the rules. These are vetted laws and vetted policies that are put out here so we can help maintain the public's trust. And you can understand, hopefully, that our teams are doing what they're supposed to be, and if they're not, they're held accountable and sometimes fired.
Sort of add one other factor in there when it comes to the safety and security of the data. These technologies are obviously, created, developed, and sold by third-party private vendors. So these are public-private partnerships, which means that in many cases, the third-party vendor, so even if law enforcement is, extremely secure in the way it handles your data, the third-party vendor may or may not still have access to the data and may be less secure. I mean, I was going to reference this later, but say Customs and Border Patrol, which is arguably, the best funded law enforcement agency in the country. They didn't get hacked, but their license plate reader camera system did. And that data, photos of people, photos of cars, or with facial recognition system, regardless, they were hacked and that data got posted online, and it's because it went through their third-party vendor. So something that I think that, both communities and law enforcement agencies really need to make sure is that when they partner with someone, that company has a very secure data privacy policy.
It's not just about hacking, it's also about who that third party might share with, right? So a lot of left-leaning communities who, enter into surveillance contracts want to do so, but make sure that the information that they're using to investigate, murders, carjackings doesn't get misused by, say, ICE for, immigration policing that those communities might not support. And you can have a policy like that that's written that we don't share data with ICE, but if the data is also shared with a third-party vendor that has its own contract, the way that data flows and gets shared between agencies, I take them quite seriously when they say they have very strict rules and policies against hacking and to prevent outsiders, but it does flow quite freely sort of within the law enforcement webs and canon, and then out to these third-party vendors. And then if that third-party vendor has a contract with ICE, all of a sudden you can find that a well-intended policy, and this was I think Oregon, you might know this better than I, had entered into, I can't remember what type of surveillance it was using, but that had a policy on we don't share this data with ICE, and then it wound up in ICE's hands by way of the third-party vendor. That also just makes me want to make one more point about the interagency sharing. Locking down the data tightly is important. I also think it's really important that the locking down of the data not be used to prevent the public from being able to find out what happens, and this also specifically happens with third-party vendors, because when governments sign contracts that include non-disclosure agreements with private third-party vendors, and let's say you are somebody who is, trying to defend yourself in court because facial recognition or ALPR has, say a license plate reader system, has implicated you, and if you can't get behind the algorithm or the technology because non-disclosure agreements are being invoked, that presents a different kind of problem that as the public who is funding this stuff, we should be concerned if when it's important, we can't figure out how it works. And then just one last point on data sharing, which is one thing that really concerns me is making sure that the data that law enforcement has gets shared out consistent with the obligations of prosecutors and police to provide exculpatory information to defendants. I think facial recognition is a great example of this one as well. Every time a facial recognition search is conducted, a lot of times it doesn't turn up a result, or it turns back a result that isn't the person who's ultimately charged. And unfortunately, there's no standing policy. The Michigan State Police, for example, is they do a lot of the facial recognition for a lot of law enforcement around the state. And they don't have a policy of disclosing to defense counsel or prosecutors when facial recognition was used but didn't result in the arrest of somebody. And if I'm a defense attorney and facial recognition was used and my client was in the database, so my client could have come up as a possible match but didn't, that's something I want to know. Because that's, you had this technology that's designed to sort of pick somebody out, and it didn't pick out my client, even though my client was a potential person, and that should be explored, and to be sure, prosecutors and police will have answers for that in court about the nature of facial recognition, and about how facial recognition is not, in fact, particularly perfect at getting a one-to-one match. But that means that we're having that conversation that I originally asked that we have more publicly about the unreliability of the technology, because it's sort of both sides are being able to talk about it.
So earlier in your presentation, Chief, you spoke about, and this is not just for you, you spoke about the integrated camera system, and that KDPS was a part of that. So what are some of the benefits of having that systems? What are some of the privacy concerns that you all take into account, and perhaps have policy on, being able to access, cameras from individual citizens and whatnot. Also, in that same vein, when we're talking about dash cams and body-worn cameras by the police, are citizens being recorded without their knowledge? And then, how often are these scrubbed or erased? What's the retention period for those videos?
Okay, so these three-part questions, sometimes my short-term memory, so I'll start with number one, and then if I forget one, let me know. But so I want to kind of talk about what our integrated camera system is. So I don't know, I guess raise your hands if you know what our FUSA system is in Kalamazoo. So we got a few. So I'm going to talk about, so I'll ask you to go to connectkalamazoo.org when you get a chance. So connectkalamazoo, all one word, .org, and that talks about our integrated camera system, and it is a public-private partnership, because one of the things we found is that not everyone, but there's a lot of people, especially public buildings, businesses, have security systems. They've had them for years, right? But we couldn't always access those. A lot of times it would take us maybe a couple of days to get the information. Let's say it was a robbery at a store, let's say a convenience store, a robbery, a 24-hour convenience store, someone comes in there, holds up the cashier. We go there, and a lot of times in the past we would say, hey, can we access your video? And like, well, I don't know how to use it. The manager isn't going to be until Monday. When the manager gets in, we'll call. So a lot of times there was a delay in getting out the suspect information. What Fusus does is people that have an integrated system, which means that they got a core. So that core is like a Roku box where you plug your security cameras basically through this core. And then the business owners, the private partnership, they can give us whatever access they feel comfortable with. They can say, we're going to give law enforcement access on just the exterior security cameras, which is what most people do. Or some, we're going to give you interior cameras and exterior cameras, but only when a crime occurs. So it's you as the core owner, you get to set whatever parameters you want as far as our ability to access it. So once you get that core, this is what allows us to set up, getting your manager to go to the back room to pull the video. We can pull it up as we're responding to that call. We can pull up the feed. If it's a robbery, we can pull up your camera and we can do a rewind on it to see what's happening 15 seconds before. And so that's what allows us to get that image of the suspect, get them out to officers responding. So it's kind of like, it's similar to the Green Light in Detroit, if you heard of that program, the Green Light. Well, that's a little bit different because Green Light, you have to buy their cameras, you have to have their system. This is, you have your own existing system, and we're just able to access it through the core. We can't manipulate your cameras, we can't change your system or anything. We can just get what's ever fed to that core. So it's a pretty unique program. We're one of the first in the state to have it. It's big in Atlanta and some other states, but it's a very effective tool. And there's a strict retention policy. We talk about retention policies. Anything that goes through the Fusus core, it's only there for 48 hours. After 48 hours, it's gone. So, and we don't need more than 40 hours. So typically if there's an incident, someone's going to know within a couple of days something happened, they can go back. But after 48 hours, it's gone. And that's with the integrated system. The other thing about Connect Kalamazoo, if you have your own Ring system in your home, okay, that's another thing, is a lot of people have Ring security cameras. If you sign in Connect Kalamazoo, it takes 30 seconds to register your camera. That does not give us the ability to access your camera. We can't access your camera, you don't have a core. But what that does is give us the ability to see where the cameras are, so we can draw a circle around that area, and if a crime occurs, we can send you a message through the app to say, hey, we just had a robbery in your area, we're looking for this suspect. If you please check your video between 1 and 2 a.m. and if you see something that looks like it could be involved, please send it to us. And then you can drop a link and we don't have to knock on your door. Because that's another thing we found in especially high crime areas. When we go knocking door to door, people see the police knocking. People don't want to think that I'm talking to police because a lot of them are scared. So now this gives you the ability to share that information with us just by dropping it in the link, and we don't have to even go to your house. And so that's the two parts of Connect Kalamazoo. And I know that was one more part of the question. So again, I told you I got a short-term memory.
It was in regards to dash cam, body-worn cameras.
Yep.
Citizens know are they being recorded without their knowledge? And what's the retention on those recordings?
Yep, so our policy is, and I think everyone else here is the same, is whenever we have an interaction with the community, so we get called and one of our officers talking to a community member, it is in our policy that they have to have their camera activated. And usually there's a red light, you can see that it's activated. But just know, if you're talking to a police officer, and they don't hide them, they're right on their chest or a big box of the camera. If you're talking to a police officer, it's being recorded, okay? And that's our policy. And there's a 60-day retention on that for us. After 60 days, it's gone. Unless there's a crime occurred that's evidence, and we could retain it for evidence for a criminal case. But if this is a normal routine interaction, nothing stands out about it, and we don't need it for anything, after 60 days, it's gone. But just, again, that's for our own officers' protection, it's for the community's protection, but if you're talking to an officer, it's going to be recorded.
I think I can probably check this one. My question is on the cameras that you have with corporations that can decide whether or not to share with you. Do they receive different policing sort of guarantees if they do share? Because one of the things that really bothers me about Project Greenlight in Detroit is they explicitly, if you sign up for Greenlight, you get more police presence, you get more treatment. I'm guessing you don't do that based on the way you've talked about it.
Yeah, so green light's a little different, like you said, they in green light, they tell you they can get virtual patrols, they call it, which means that if you're, let's say you own a liquor store and you're on green light, I don't know how often that you're supposed to, like, say the police department is going to log in and just make sure everything's going okay at your establishment. That's not how we do with the FUSIS core. It's just if something happens, then we access it. We don't randomly pull up videos. And again, there's a very robust audit feature on that. So if one of my officers is pulling up a location, they have to put in there why. There's a thing where they type in a code, what the reason was they pulled that up. And random patrol isn't one of them that we allow. So it's maybe there was a suspicious occurrence and they have to put it wasn't, and any connecting case number has to go in there as well. So yeah, good point.
Technology to write police reports for probable cause statements. And are there any policies related to that?
We have written at the sheriff's office a strict policy that you will not use any AI to create a report. And one of the things I found out after doing that months later, we have a technology that is again part of our camera system that the company has added to it, and we are researching the situation right now, where as the person's talking, there's dictation going on. And I was watching a case where we'd been involved in a pursuit, and then at the end of the pursuit, people are talking, and it identified over here the officer's name and says this. Officer's name says this. And I think later on, because this was after a report, it put suspect number 1. But in the end, it was a technology that was, to me, inadvertently part of the technologies that we purchased. And so we're seeking, a way of making sure that one, our team never uses that information as a report. But my next fear is the courts. So now we go into a court and the computer says these things, but that's not what they reported because that's not what they said. It's going to be real common that we are learning technologies that are learning us, and we have to figure out how to work with those technologies and to make sure that the rights of people are not infringed upon, to make sure that the officer's actions are accurately depicted in these situations. And so I'm a big fan of making sure that we are making every possible concession towards someone who's being accused of something, because we understand that technologies can put something on somebody when they may not be involved. And so that's a technology that we are continually trying to adjust. The other thing is too, technology costs are tremendous. Every month you're paying for the storage of these things. And that's why, again, it's important that we don't store as much as the system will collect for very lengthy times. Because like the chief pointed out, if it's involved in a case, it will be tagged with a case number and that information will be kept. If it's not, then after 30 or 60 days, depending on what type of information it is, it goes away. We no longer have access to it. And we want to make sure that that is the case, that people understand that it's not kept for years. So.
The state police, like the sheriff's office, has a policy that we don't use AI, but to take it a step further, we also audit at least on an annual basis, if not twice annually, random sampling of every trooper's reports, and we compare that to their body cam footage to make sure that the report that is written is accurately accurate in comparison to their body cam footage. So that's another safeguard that is in place that to make sure that what the trooper is writing in their report is an accurate reflection of what actually occurred.
I think this is actually a kind of an interesting place to think about how quickly this technology is changing and how, so say at first we saw AI being used to generate police reports. Axon Draft One is like one big company doing this. We hated this. We're like, this is, you need a human touch on something as important and significant as this. And I'm glad to hear that this is not being done here. But then all of a sudden, there's AI, as a company Trulio, that is using AI to audit body cam footage, which is massive amounts of video footage. A human is not going to be able to capably go through all of that. And we saw in some of the jurisdictions that tried this, there was actually a reduction in hostile encounters between police and civilians. And we have come to sort of a place on what we think about this. And in some ways, we can't figure out a way to regulate and stop use of something like using AI to draft police reports, while also having it do something that we think might be beneficial. And so I think it really sort of, AI really illustrates how quickly the landscape's changing and how confusing figuring out where some of this tech can be useful and cannot be useful.
People like me and Lisa, who spend a lot of our lives worrying about deployment of algorithms and technologies and the ways that it can wind up being unfair, have misleading results. I think we need to be cautious about sort of jumping to conclusions that Trulio is a great idea because, now we're surveilling cops who some of us are a little more suspicious of. Because, for several reasons. Not the least is it sometimes gets it wrong. For the same reasons that I'm concerned about regular folks being, sort of unfairly targeted because an AI system analyzed something. I don't think that should happen to officers either. And another is sort of the ways that humans can feed back on the system. Another effect that people are really worried about Trulio is, if you just say stop resisting, Trulio is going to learn to analyze that as, there was no resistance in this, or there was resistance in this, and so I can move past it. So as I do when I'm focusing more on the targets of policing, I want to worry about keeping humans in the loop and not jumping to the conclusion that Trulio should be used to surveil the law enforcement for a lot of the same reasons that I'm worried about how we use it on the citizenry at large.
There's one question on here I just want to tackle myself because I am certified law enforcement and I think I know the answer to this. There was a question about how, explain how dispatch centers and police know that someone has a warrant. So dispatch centers have the law enforcement information network at their disposal. We call it a lean system as an acronym. Warrants are placed in there once they're received from the prosecutor's office. Someone has a warrant issued. Their information will be placed in that system. Sometimes it's national. If it's a felony, if it's a local warrant, it'll stay at the local level. When police run someone's file, that information is then given back to the officer, say at a traffic stop, that individual possesses a warrant for whatever. Police who investigate crimes and submit a warrant to the prosecutor's office for someone's arrest, they'll also obtain information from their court officer who goes in to the prosecutor's office and picks up the information about warrants and bring it back to the officers. So that's how we generally know when someone has an active warrant. So the questions, the last two questions before we wrap up to the panel. What can the public do to facilitate or help out with investigations? And what can the public do to protect their own privacy?
These things are listening to us all the time. How often have you talked about something? Like the other day I was saying, I need a new chainsaw, and next thing you know, I got chainsaw heads popping up. That freaks me out. I don't like it, and so I think there's a huge privacy concern on that end. But I think for the public, protecting privacy, I think that's one of the things is these cell phones are convenient and these iPhones are convenient, but man, I worry about the data it's gathering on us all the time. But then for us, as far as law enforcement goes, I think it's just the partnerships. It's just, and what we're doing here at our agencies is, like we're doing today, is just being transparent, meeting with the public. I think this has been great hearing from the left side of the seats here, because I think that's interesting. It's a good perspective for us. Because truly, it was one of the things, I've seen, and I know it's kind of cool, but I do have concerns about it. So I think just having discussions and dialogue as a community is huge. And we got to break down, I always say we got to break down the us versus them mentality, okay? It's, you know, we're never gonna get anywhere and reduce crime and have a safe community if we have an us versus them mentality when it comes to law enforcement in the community. It's all gonna be us together. And if there's concerns about technology, ask. And maybe you're gonna come up with something we didn't think about. Oh, geez, I need a policy on that. Thanks for bringing that up. Have that two-way communication, I think, is the key. This panel is just another example of that. I appreciate Ashante and everyone from CCGT putting this together. Thank you all for being here, and giving us some of your time on a Friday to hear us talk up here, so appreciate it.
In this room, there are probably people that have a camera on their car because they've seen the technology on TikTok or on Facebook or on anything, and they thought that was a good idea, so they put a camera on their car. All right? So we are all adding to these things. We talked about Ring cameras. We also found that it's very inaccurate what people will guess how many times they are on a camera in a day. I remember early in my career as the sheriff, I was concerned about how many cameras people were on all the time. So I did some research back in 2009, and I found then that it was predicted that people were on camera 16 times a day. And I started thinking about that. I was like, 16 times a day? Wow, where? So I thought, well, I went and got gas today. I was at the grocery store. Oh, I made a traffic stop today. I was on a camera, you know, those types of things. And so that was 16 times a day. What we're finding is that the number of cameras everywhere, I mean, I've got them on my front door. Most people have them on their front door now. We're finding more and more of those. And so what we can do to help make sure that we're protecting our own abilities from a privacy invasion is reconsider the cameras. That's one thing we can do is reconsider our own cameras. But you're not going to be able to change the grocery stores, the banks, the gas stations. You know, those are the things that they're going to put out there to help protect their interest. So just understand that. And like I said, there are a lot of people that underpredict how many times you've been on a camera. Currently, the experts are saying that you should guess that at least 50 times a day, if you leave your house, at least 50 times a day, you are on a camera for somebody's either collection, use, observance. So just think about that.
The only thing that I would add is, you know, as I've been sitting here listening to all of the conversation today, I've been reflecting about how much has changed during my career. I mean, the three gentlemen up here on the stage in policing have all been in this for 30 plus years. And I think of how we used to do policing when I came in. And when I came in 94, believe it or not, the post commander was hiding the typewriters to get people to convert to the new computer system. So that's how long I've been doing this. You think about how we used to do police work and where we're at now, and we have come a very long way. But we have to find the balance. I think it's important to realize that technology isn't perfect. It's always improving. When you think about the first cell phone that came out, it was largely a bag phone that you could have in your car that plugged in a cigarette lighter. And now, of course, you can pretty much control the world from your cell phone. No one would have ever thought that technology was headed in that direction. And I don't think anyone has a clue on where technology is heading in a lot of these arenas that we've spoken about today. So how do you protect yourself as members of the public? Understand that technology before you just hit accept or agree to terms or in conditions, because that's why your cell phone is listening to you and pulling up the chainsaw, because somewhere along the line you agreed to those terms and conditions, and so it has the ability to listen to you. So that those legal disclaimers are a big deal. Understand the technology before you just agree to it. Couldn't agree with the chief more about what makes us effective as police agencies. It's the community relationships that we have. It's when the community gets involved. It's when the community takes that choice and makes that choice to get involved with us, to be a partner and to fight crime, to hold people who are breaking the law responsible, so that we don't have to, in our safe spaces, allow for the intrusion of a camera or a listening device everywhere. That's the last thing that we as the police want to see as well. I don't want that. I think your point is well taken, Phil, that your safe space doesn't include where camera or listening device is installed. And so when you think about things in those terms, the best way for us to fight crime and to keep one another safe is to cooperate with one another. It really comes back to that. I don't think any technology will ever be created that will take the place of cooperation and trust. And that's why forums like this are so important. And thank you again for attending.
Keeping yourself safe, I mean, these are decisions we are making collectively. I mean, part of, I think, why anybody who's in this room is here is because we want to make sure that, when our government requires surveillance technology, that we know what's happening, that we have a chance to stop that if we don't want it to happen. But the amount of private surveillance, the Ring cameras, the phones, all of this, we are making these decisions collectively. And let's not pretend that this is just a decision that is being made by law enforcement officers. I think we all have to think seriously about that and take that seriously. And like you said, it's, do I want cameras everywhere? It's not just law enforcement that's installing cameras everywhere, we're all doing it. In terms of, yes, read your terms and conditions. Although, the things about the terms and conditions is good luck going through life in the 21st century without your cell phone, even if you, say do not accept to a bunch of terms and conditions unless you want to smash the thing entirely and, have no friends and no social outlets. And that's because we're making these decisions. And look, I have a panel in the afternoon that's going to talk about the Fourth and Fifth Amendment. I think Lisa's going to be talking about the First Amendment. But, Constitution's great. I'm a constitutional lawyer. I got a lot of things to say about the Constitution, but the Constitution is not going to save us here either. It can't keep up. Courts can't keep up. They will not and cannot interpret the Constitution aggressively enough and fast enough to keep up with technology. So if we're going to regulate this as a society, it has to be done locally. It has to be done in city councils and state governments because I don't know if y'all been paying attention to the federal legislature, but we're not going to get a lot done there either. And frankly, it's at too macro of a scale really for a lot of what needs to be done. These are decisions we're making in our community. These are decisions we're making at our city councils. These are decisions we're making in our county commissions, and we have to be engaged as a citizenry if we want policies that we like.
First, I think a huge part of this is actually just you guys being here in the room. It means there's people in the community that care enough about these issues to come and sit here and listen to it. And there are ways to, and risk of making your jobs harder, but there are ways for you guys to continue to pursue this. Look for those policies, look for those audit logs. If you want more information, there are freedom of information laws. You can get more information, learn what's happening, and push for the transparency, accountability, oversight measures that you think match what you're seeing in your community. And then on a final note that isn't law enforcement, but to respond to everyone talking about our phones, and we all have a responsibility. Yes, I personally would not put a Ring camera on my door, sorry, but some of it is, we constantly feel guilty that, you're just hitting accept cookies, I'm lazy, I'm being tracked, what can I do about it? And some of this isn't on you. We need comprehensive consumer privacy in this country, and that is something that needs to happen at state level and at the federal level to, protect us from mass data tracking. And it's not a very popular or sexy issue right now, but if you're here and thinking about it, maybe it's something you can start talking about also in your community and pushing your political leaders to care about.
I did have one question I want to ask. I know we asked the chief Boysend about, I'm sorry I said your name, but we asked you about the retention policy for the data, but we didn't talk about the sheriff or the city trooper. Retention policy. I know you mentioned that you do an audit once or twice a year. But when I was thinking about that, it kind of fits with the data retention policy that KDPS does. Is your data retention policy different for body cams? Do you keep it every longer if you're doing audits once a year? How long do you keep your privilege the same for the sheriff?
So you're exactly correct. So the The 60 days is only if it's not affiliated with a traffic stop or a complaint. It will be kept longer if it is affiliated with a complaint. It will be kept until that complaint is completely adjudicated if it's affiliated with an investigation. And it's those investigations that, because there's a report associated with that we're able to then compare during our internal audits. But if it's just a traffic stop or something like that, obviously there is no report generated. We also audit those to make sure that our officers, our troopers are being professional and are adhering to policy throughout the interaction with the public. But there is no written document that is able to be compared other than maybe a traffic citation, which we can do that as well. But there's no written report on that interaction. Does that help?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I apologize, I thought. So when I'm saying that it's held 60 days at the sheriff's office, again, that's for anything that is a general traffic stop. And if it is going to be a case, that's where that case number is attached. And it will be kept throughout the history or the life of that case. And of course, if it's a murder trial, then it never goes away. But it's going to be related to the type of case if it is a case. And if it's a traffic stop that leads to nothing else, it goes away after 60 days.
Okay, so it's kind of standard among.
It is, well, I would say standard amongst agencies. What I'm going to caution everybody to understand is there are agencies that are fairly well funded, have really strong guidelines as to who they hire, how they operate, and how they allow their deputies or police officers to operate. And then there are agencies that just will say, and to be honest, they can't afford to do the same work the same way. So we're answering for these agencies here. Okay.